Commerce and WorldDenver. We're really excited to get started today. We are going to be focusing on the very exciting, very new world of esports. Esports is something that has grown in the past few years, and is something that is actually succeeding in spite of the coronavirus. So before we get started, I want to do a quick housekeeping rule set for you guys. If you have questions, we're very happy to extend those to our panelists. We ask that you enter your questions in the question tab, which should be on usually the right-hand side of your screen. Please do not use the chat function for questions. Using the question section will help us keep that nice and organized. If you don't see that, there's a little red arrow or a white arrow on a red background. You can click that and it should expand the panel for you. Great, so I'd quickly like to just say a few words about the German American Chamber of Commerce. We are the Colorado chapter, and we are dedicated to the improvement of investment and trade relations between Germany and the United States, specifically in Colorado. You may know us for one of our large events, the Denver Chris Kindle Market, which we hold every winter. But we also host a lot of other events like these ones, where it's webinars or in-person events when they're allowed to happen, where we talk about business and trade between Germany and the United States. But we're also co-hosted today by WorldDenver. And John, if you'd like to say a quick few words about your organization.
Yeah, thank you, William. And so WorldDenver is an organization based in Denver that facilitates international exchange. I'm really excited about today's program because it kind of mirrors or resembles our exchange programs. We facilitate an international visitors leadership program through the State Department that brings folks from industries or from different nonprofits or different areas of focus to cities around the country to exchange ideas and expertise from their relative industries. And to take an industry, an emerging one like esports, to have folks on this presentation today in Germany and Canada, but then also here in the US, and talk a little bit about our commonalities and the ways in which we're seeing some of the same things, even though we're in different places in the world. We usually do that in person, but it's really great to see that we can still do it virtually through the International Solidarity Series. And so I'm really excited for this today.
Great. Thanks so much, John. And yeah, so without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panel. If we could actually start with Marc, if you could introduce yourself, say who you are, who you work for, where you are. Yeah, just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Marc. I'm from Berlin, Germany. I work for a company that's called eSportsReputation. We are an agency for esports athletes. And yeah, we connect players or athletes and clubs. And when companies or clubs like football clubs want to start an esports division, or we will want to be connected to players or companies, that's where we come in place, and we connect them and help them developing.
Excellent. And I'm sorry, what was your title? What do you specifically do?
Yeah, I'm the head of the Berlin office, and yeah, so that's my title. Yeah.
Great. Dominque.
Hi, I'm Dominque Gelineau. I'm the general manager for the Toronto Ultra. We are the Canadian team in Activision Blizzard's Call of Duty League, so the official esports league run by the publisher for Call of Duty. In my role, I oversee logistics, budgeting, strategy, collaborating with our team leadership as well as our business departments, and so kind of acting as a conduit between the players and the business. And then I also do league relations, general PR and community engagement events like this one. And I spent the last 5 years working in HR and recruitment, including a stint at Activision Blizzard. In my past, I was also an in-game commentator. So much like you would see in traditional sports broadcasts, where you might have former athletes who move over to the in-game color and analytics side. I did that for a couple of years as well within Call of Duty. So a bit more on the endemic side of things. And obviously I'm based out of Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, very cool. Well, welcome. Thank you. Josue, if you could introduce yourself.
So I'm Josue Velasco. I'm the current director of esports for CU Boulder eSports. So I oversee all of our collegiate competitive teams across, I think now 12 or 13 different titles. We compete with a bunch of other universities from across the nation. And so my focus is just working with the players and the team managers, team captains, analysts, things like this to try and give collegiate students an opportunity to compete while they're in school.
Very cool. Thank you. And then Zach, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Zach Cayer. I work for SportsMonster. I'm the league manager for the St. Louis office. We have offices all over the country. Basically, we run adult rec leagues, including like basketball, softball, kickball, all that kind of stuff. We've just recently got into eSports, which is pretty good timing for us right now because none of our customers can really do anything outside right now. So we're just trying to find a way to keep people engaged and having fun.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, so let's go ahead and get started. Esports is actually probably new for a lot of our members, both on the WorldDenver side and the German American Chamber side. I would love if someone could actually give us an overview of what is esports and how does it work? Maybe Marc or Dominque?
Yeah, I can take that one. So esports, easiest way to think about it is it's at its most basic core, it's competitive video games. On a higher level, it's much more than just playing online tournaments. That is one aspect, is more of the recreational side, much like traditional sports. Like Zach said, you might have more of your like beer league hockey or like your pickup community games. You have a very large breadth from casual games online with friends that could be built into the game. So for example, something like Call of Duty, we're starting to see Activision actually offering tournaments with cash prizes within the game, and players can actually just jump into that game, jump into that tournament right within the game versus having to register online through another website or a third-party platform. Then it goes all the way up to the professional level, which is where someone like I might be, where our teams and our players are playing full time. Again, much like you would see in the traditional sports side, you've got live events, you've got online production. Some leagues actually air on more traditional media networks as well, like ESPN. For example, Overwatch League, which is also run by Activision Blizzard, has run matches on the past on, I think it's ESPN2. And ESPN is actually quite known for their coverage of esports events on the journalism side. And then you also have collegiate programs, which is where more Josue comes in, and you're seeing more and more schools also offer athletic scholarships for esports. They might be in specific game titles, or they might be for for specific years. So more and more schools are starting to build that program. I'm certainly not the best person on the panel to touch on that, but there is quite a scope. And it's just the easiest connection is really video games in the place of a more traditional athletic sport.
Thank you. And typically, are these when we're not thinking about the virus, how are these games played? Are they typically everyone is at home anyway, or can you tell us about like arenas, or what would a tournament look like?
Yeah, so it depends on the league format. Some leagues like Overwatch League operate on more of a single match schedule, so much like you would see with let's say the NHL or the NBA, where you have a fixed schedule. When a team is traveling, they're playing maybe 1 to 3 matches for that weekend. There are some events as well that are larger tournaments. So if you think like a double elimination tournament, let's say something like I'm originally from Vancouver, and we used to have the Big Sevens tournament every year, and so that would be more of a traditional athletic format. Usually double elimination, you lose 2 games, you're out. And you progress through, so it gives more of a compelling storyline for those leagues where fans can follow their favorite team's journey throughout that weekend, and it can potentially provide more content. And then in terms of like how the tournaments are run, some tournaments do online qualifiers to start, and then might do their semifinals and grand finals in person on what we call a LAN event, or an in-person tournament at an arena. Something like League of Legends is a good example of that, where they do a much larger event in a much bigger venue specifically to celebrate kind of the end of that season or the end of that split, as they call it. For someone like us, up until COVID happened, our league was always traveling. So whenever we would play matches, each team would host one tournament during the season, and the rest of the time we would be on the road. So it gives fans around the world more of an opportunity to see that action live versus feeling like they're stuck watching online because they're in a specific geographic location.
And for the other panelists, so Josue, what does it look like at CU?
Yeah, so at least on our campus, it was very much just students playing out of their dorms. We don't have anything big like an arena. It was basically wherever players already had their sort of playing setting. That's generally where they played from. There were a couple of opportunities for us to do sort of LAN scrims. So essentially we would go to one of the local facilities, which is localhost, and actually play out matches against other teams while the entire team was sort of together. But in general, it really was just the students in their dorms. Obviously everyone with some sort of line of communication, but yeah, just playing remotely for their respective games.
And Zach, you were mentioning, so you're at the recreational level, and you just launched, correct, during COVID-19. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, it seems like obviously all of your players would be working or playing remotely.
Yeah, so we've been in talks with a local St. Louis company, an esports company startup, about launching. We talked to them last winter, and it kind of just coincidentally that we launched in the last month with everything going on. But we're spread out across all our markets, so everything is definitely remote because you might have somebody in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania playing somebody out in Denver, Colorado. We can't get those two in the same room. Eventually, we'd like to be able to grow it, and if we get more market central, then we may have, like all the playoffs meet up at a certain esports arena or location. But right now, it's definitely everybody just playing from home, and that's all we can do.
And then Marc, you're obviously based in Europe. With your organization, are you seeing that are all of your games pretty Germany centric, or is it nationwide or internationally wide?
So our clients are worldwide. So we have clients in New Zealand and in Japan and in Brazil and everywhere. And so especially with the FIFA esport, for example, it's that many countries have a league system like the football league is as well. So football clubs have esports departments, and they play in a league that's over a month, and then in the end there will be a champion like in the countries, and that can still happen with even with the situation right now, because that happens mostly online, except for one highlight game that's on TV, but that's obviously not happening at the moment. But there's like a bit like the Champions League or some international leagues. You also have international events where players qualify online, and then they usually meet at an event somewhere over the world. Like we had events this year in Paris and Atlanta, for example, and last year in Singapore. And those are, of course, on hold. So they haven't decided yet if they want to maybe do them online, but that will be problematic because over distances from New Zealand to Brazil or from New Zealand to Europe, it's not the same chance for everyone. So yeah, so not every esport is affected the same way at the moment, but yeah, of course, every sport and esport is also affected at least a little bit.
So where I would love to take this conversation is to learn a little bit more about how your industry has been impacted by COVID-19, as well as what other industries can learn from esports. But before we dive into that too deeply, I just have one more general question that actually came from our audience. Could you tell us a little bit about the consoles that are required to start getting involved in esports, and what are the games that you're playing? Is it actually sport focused, like something like football or soccer, or is it other games? And obviously there's some very popular games right now like Animal Crossing. Is that something that could be involved in the esports world? What are we actually playing here?
I guess I can start with that one. So Call of Duty, we play on console. Call of Duty is the majority of our player base has always been on console. There hasn't been a lot of crossover between PC and consoles until this year. So this year was the first year where, similar to Fortnite, you could have players on PlayStation 4 playing with players on Xbox One and also with PC, versus only getting matched up with players on your platform. So it does mean that there are more opportunities for friends to also play together. So it's a very social piece as well for the casual gamer, not necessarily for esports. In Call of Duty, we're on PS4 because Sony has a marketing deal with Activision Blizzard. So in the past, we've been on Xbox 360, we've been on Xbox One, and then we moved over to PS4. The PS4 is coming up on the end of its life cycle. So the expectation was that PS5 was supposed to release this year. Obviously, with the global economy not in a very good state, particularly for the manufacturing industry, we're still waiting to hear whether or not that will actually happen, if we stay on PS4 or if we potentially shift over to PC. The majority of major esports titles, at least on the professional side, are on PC. So our parent company, Overactive Media, also owns franchises in League of Legends, CS:GO, and Overwatch, and those are all played on PC.
And would it be similar across the board with the other panelists?
So with FIFA, the difference is that every team or most teams have Xbox and PlayStation players. So nothing happens on PC on the professional side. But usually teams have at least one PlayStation and one Xbox player, and they play the Xbox and PlayStation players from the other team or of the other team. And on the international competitions, there's usually a PlayStation and an Xbox play tree. And so you have an Xbox champion and a PlayStation champion, and they play the grand final against each other for the big prize money and everything. So, but usually in FIFA, you have both consoles and players who are specified for one console, so they don't play both.
Right.
Yeah, I'm interested also in, Zach touched on this a little bit, just what the last 6 weeks have looked like for you all personally and for your countries in Germany and in Canada. I know here I can just about see from my house a basketball court with caution tape around it, and it's been that way for about a month. And I know, Marc, we talked about this a little bit before the webinar started, how Germany is a little ahead of the US and some things are starting to open up again. So in particular, Marc and Dominque, if you can talk a little bit about Germany and Canada and what your realities look like right now.
Hey, Dominque, if it's okay, I'm starting this time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Germany decided to reopen shops, small shops, and places like zoos and etc. This week again, because our numbers are so good and they're decreasing, and we have so many free hospital beds, and we have, I think, the lowest death rate worldwide. So they are trying now to find out what they can do to to bring a bit of normality back to life without increasing the numbers again too much. So that's right now like a test phase to check out if people can be as disciplined as they have been the last month, even if there are no official restrictions in every corner of your social life every day. But yeah, so the last since it started, the last weeks we had the same like everywhere else. We also had the caution tapes around playgrounds and yeah, sports areas. But yeah, so it was hard, but yeah, I feel like Germans are quite disciplined when it comes to following orders that that your government tells you. So everyone stayed inside, and now they are checking out if what people will do when the government says, okay, you can go outside, but please be careful, and you have all those rules you should stick to. But it's yeah, so let's see what happens. But at the moment, it's really looking good, and people are optimistic for the future here.
And then on the Canadian side, very similar with regards to the restrictions that came in place. Caution tape around the playgrounds. Downstairs in my apartment building, we have a grocery store and a McDonald's, and both of them have very clear 6-foot markers outside. So a lot of places that are open are either doing, you have to call in pre-order if you want to pick something up, or you have to queue up like everyone else, and they're doing staggered entrances. A lot of stores here as well in the beginning did an early shopping hour for more vulnerable demographics. So in particular, as seniors, folks who might have medical conditions, to help reduce the potential interaction and risk of not contamination, but the risk of passing on the virus. On the business side, for us, obviously, it was a big shift because we are a traveling league. So we had, I think, 7 more trips booked in the next 3 months, and those obviously all got canceled. So our league has shifted to doing online matches during the regular season. The playoffs and end of season is to be determined because that's July, August. So that's about 3 months out, and hopefully things clear up a bit more in the meantime. I think the biggest thing for us in Canada is the closure of the Canada-US border. It's obviously the single largest international border in the world. There's a huge amount of free flow of economy, people, goods, and so I think just that. Even I remember before the announcement came out, just the rumor of a potential closure or a limit on who can cross the border was already a big scare for the economy, and then for it to actually happen and then hear that it's been renewed for another 30 days, I think really indicates, I think that was really the indication for most people here that this is a serious situation and that we shouldn't take it lightly. Besides that, it's starting to warm up here for spring weather, so people are trying to take advantage of the fact that it's not snowing anymore, and just trying to get out whenever we can.
And so you brought us some interesting points. I would actually love to hear from the other panelists as well in terms of how has, if you could give us a contrast, what was your organization or even your specific role like before COVID-19, and then maybe some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered or biggest changes to your organization since we've gone into these stay-at-home orders and different types of lockdowns. Josue, could you let us know about yours?
Yeah, definitely. It was really kind of hectic when we first started getting these announcements about social distancing, because on top of esports existing online, we also have kind of our community side where we hosted a lot of events, panels, things like this. And when these announcements first started coming out, it was really difficult for us in leadership to really figure out what our approach was going to be, because at the very least, when it wasn't as serious, we were on the fence about some things. But once all this started kind of piling on, we were like, well, for starters, all of our events are canceled. That's really unfortunate. And I think the biggest shift, at least from the players' perspective, was definitely the fact that a lot of our student athletes are living in the dorms. So when a lot of the universities across the country started asking their students to leave the dorms whenever possible, a lot of people were displaced. And so I guess the biggest hurdle for us was really figuring out where our players were from a ability to play perspective. And we do know of a lot of people in the collegiate scene where they weren't people that were used to just sitting in their dorm and playing. It was about going to like a practice center or an arena or something like that, where once those closed, they were unable to play. So our biggest challenge was definitely just making sure that our players, first of all, were doing okay, because getting displaced from university, myself included, was really kind of a shock to the system. But on top of that, trying to understand which of the leagues were still running, what was canceled, how many of our teams lost their opportunity to play for the semester. And then on top of that, you know, finding new opportunities in light of the whole situation. There were actually a lot of new leagues that popped up, a lot of new tournaments. I think it was very much as a result of the whole situation. So yeah, navigating it was really just difficult because of the amount of displacement that there was, where we were literally being moved from our current place of residence where we're used to playing and practicing to somewhere entirely different.
And yeah, I can only imagine being shifted all over the place and dealing with like new, even just internet connections must be a lot. I mean, Zach, how about you? I can only imagine what it's like to launch something brand new amidst all of this.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. You know, like I said before, adult rec leagues, our main thing is person-to-person interaction, getting together and playing basketball or kickball, whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden you can't do that. You can't get near anybody. So it completely changed the focus of our business, and now everything is kind of put in this eSports. Other ways to keep people interacting online with other apps and games that you can play as an organization, stuff like that. But definitely we've been pushing eSports hard as a way to keep our customers with us, keep them engaged. It's been very interesting.
And then Marc and Dominque, I mean, you guys are at the level where you're not just dealing with players, but there's also sponsors and networks and all sorts of people involved. I'd love to hear more about what types of challenges and responses you've been encountering there.
Well, in the beginning, it felt a bit like there were 2 weeks of people in shock and not knowing what to do, and then they came back to, okay, now we know a bit what's going on, and let's try to focus everything to steer in a direction where we can use the circumstances that are now in place to for new opportunities, maybe. So in branches that already work online, nothing really has changed. So they can still have games around the world. They can still do a lot of work there from home. So we don't have to go into offices or to offline stages to play games. And even for the professional, I want to call it physical games like sports, football, soccer, whatever, they are now all not allowed to do their sport. So if they didn't have an esport department before, many of them now have. So their players, even we see that a lot with football players, they love playing FIFA anyway. So now we help clubs organize games for big professional football clubs, and they have one esport player and one professional football player. They play together against some other and like that. And you see that with even national teams with games today. Israel versus Austria, and with professional football players and esport players, and they come together for that. And so that's a good way of trying to use this new situation in a way that not everyone's just sitting at home and don't do anything. And even though we see that with companies a lot, they're now they were interested in esports before because they heard, oh, it's such an growing market, and oh wow, that's also interesting, but we don't know what that is. So everything took a while. But now there's they all have still their financial opportunities, at least in a certain amount, but they can't use that for football games, for hockey games, for whatever. So but they still want to do something. So esport is the only opportunity they have at the moment. So we get a lot of contact with, oh yeah, can you tell us how can we enter esport? What can we do there? And yeah, especially now that people see that it will not be over in 2 weeks and everything will be back to normal, but still many leagues have just closed, so they finished their season early, and other leagues are debating, will they have games without spectators? So that's everyone knows now that this will not be over quickly, so now they search for different opportunities, and esport is in sports the only sport at the moment that's really doing something. So everyone is very interested there.
Yeah, same thing for me, very much a combination of what Josue and Marc said. It was kind of the first couple weeks of immediate response, dealing with how do we get people quickly working from home. For us, we were playing from a facility before, so how do we make sure that our players are set up to play from home? Not only that, but because our players relocated from around the world to be here, how do we think about their general physical and mental well-being, given that they're away from their loved ones in a different country? Canada is obviously known for our healthcare system, so at least there could be worse spots to be in this kind of situation, but it's still, these are 19 to 26-year-olds that may be away from home for the first time, and I'm sure that Josue can probably attest this as well, that it wasn't necessarily a displacement on our in our situation, but just that shift of what you're used to for 8 to 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's the majority of your waking hours, so that in itself was a pivot. Dealing with our partners, so figuring out, okay, well, we can't record content for our partners in person anymore, like we can't go to a studio, so how do we get that content online, and how do we educate the players, because we can't be there to set up lighting and cameras and having the right props, or even going to the right locations. So now you're thinking about downtown apartments, real estate in major Canadian cities is a little bit at a premium. So thinking about how do you maximize the space and what you have available, and then also working with our leagues. We were used to in-person events even before we went into a franchising and city-based model this year. And so looking at how do we pivot those matches online. You're dealing with 12 different teams. Thankfully, all of our teams were based in North America. So in our league, we had 2 European teams, but they both played out of North America because the connection in Call of Duty in particular is quite a big factor. So that made it a little bit easier, but it's still a logistical challenge when you're dealing with, maybe our team is playing someone on the West Coast, and then our next match after that, we're playing against someone in Florida and then Texas. And so figuring out servers and how do you keep things as neutral as possible to maintain the competitive integrity so that fans still feel like they're getting the best experience possible given the circumstances, and that we're not just saying, okay, we're just going to play online and that's it. Like, we really want to be thoughtful about the competitive piece, the online and production that we're putting into the final product. And then, yeah, I guess the other thing as well is like Marc said, just the realization after the first few weeks. I would say in the last week or two, that's really where we saw the shift in everyone that we're working with of this is not going to be done anytime soon. I spent some time in the music world as well, and a lot of my friends who work in festival and event production on that side, you're hearing stories about things like EDC and Lollapalooza and Tomorrowland being canceled. Tomorrowland being one of the biggest music events in the world across any genre, and to hear that event just get canceled out of nowhere was a big wake-up call. And so now you have people thinking creatively and out of the box. Marc touched on this, that we have that big crossover between traditional sports and esports. In Call of Duty, we're seeing that because there was a launch of a new game mode called Warzone, which is one of those big maps. You have 150 people drop in, and you're working in teams to try to be the last team to stay alive. And there's a big push from traditional athletes to stream in that game mode because it's the easiest way for them to connect with their fans, since their fans can't come to their games or to their community engagement events. So you're seeing a lot of athletes gravitate towards platforms like Twitch TV, YouTube, Facebook gaming. There's a huge push for live streaming because it allows them to still stay engaged, but also engage with their fans on a much more intimate and closer level. You know, you don't have a fan that's, if you're at a hockey match, let's say, your fan isn't in the stands behind glass, behind referees and all of that. Your fan can literally talk to you in the chat from their phone, from their PC, you know, while they're working in the middle of the day. So there's just a lot of opportunities there for crossover, even for titles where the crossover, like something like FIFA, you know, it's pretty obvious, right? You have businesses that have clear units in both verticals, whereas for something like Call of Duty, obviously we don't have a traditional sports vertical in our group, but there's still a lot of opportunity there, and we're seeing a lot of traditional groups come to businesses like us for that expertise and guidance. Marc probably is going to say the same thing on his end as well, that there's a lot of interest from our non-traditional partners.
Yes.
Again, I think one of the other big wake-up calls was when the 2020 Olympics were canceled. Mm-hmm. And we always think of sports at WorldDenver as diplomacy and the ability, you know, to across borders for people to come together. I wonder if folks can talk a little bit about both the international aspect on the positive side, the way in which esports is, the competitions are international and go across borders, but then also some of the challenge, you know, the positive to that, and then maybe the challenges as well, as people are in different phases of COVID-19 or are in different circumstances, even with their technical infrastructure in their countries.
I didn't want to jump in first because I jumped in first most of the time, but I guess I can take this one a little bit. So I can touch on the German piece a little bit because one of our League of Legends team is based in Berlin, and my counterpart there has shared some very interesting stories about the internet infrastructure over there. Marc can probably attest to this a bit more than I can, but certainly some places are more set up for success in that transition to online through the COVID situation. For example, some of the LA teams that we've played against have had a challenge because even though we think of LA as one of the biggest cities in the world, very developed, it's happening nonstop, like you would think that the infrastructure is there from a technical perspective, but a lot of the infrastructure there isn't used to having that much concurrent load, so number of active users at any given time. LA is a very big city and they have a lot of infrastructure, but a lot of people are also not home at the same time, right? It's a city where people are constantly moving and there's things always happening. So it's not a city where people are online 9 to 5 and then streaming Netflix from 7 to 9 until they go to bed. They're just not used to that kind of scale, and so that's been a challenge for us, not necessarily just on the team level, but as a league as a whole. You know, all of our teams had to come together to support the league because the reality is there's no blueprint for how to get through this, and so we're just trying to keep as many different voices in the conversation as possible and trying to keep that free flow of communication, because it might just be that one idea that seems crazy that could actually work. Kind of the same way that esports started, right? No one thought that video games would really turn out to be a multi-billion-dollar industry that would somehow survive when other industries are really struggling to even keep their doors open, but here we are. So that would probably be the biggest challenge, is just there are so many different regional challenges with regards to infrastructure available, with regards to things like provider availability. Here in Canada, we have a bit more of a monopoly when it comes to telecommunications. Our company is very fortunate that one of our main partners is the biggest telecom company in Canada, and so they've made sure that we're all set up for success with our teams here. On the successes side, I think it's really given an opportunity for us to rethink how we were doing things. Esports definitely exploded in the last few years, and I think we were starting to get to the point where we were getting a little complacent and very comfortable with how we were doing things. So to have this kind of complete shock to the system is forcing us to think outside of the box and really think about, are we operating at the level that we could be operating at? Do we actually have all of the right resources to be able to adapt when things happen? And really thinking about, what does this look like for our future? Kind of like John and William said, we're going to be here a while, and even once we're through this and we start to see our economy start to come back to normal, that's going to be years down the line. So not only do we have to think about the next 3-6 months for our players, but also what do the next 2 to 5 years look like for our business as a whole. So I think for us, it's really been interesting seeing how we adapt, and then how we collaborate with our different offices. We have our Berlin office, and then we also have our Madrid office, and to really think about, how do we bring all of these players together. On the business side, obviously, we're talking about how we adapt, but also from the player perspective, each country is in a different stage, and there's opportunity for that education at different levels within the organization.
Yeah, and I think esports has a big advantage to physical sports in that way, that you have, usually for esport division, you have a publisher who is in charge of the game. So it doesn't take all those processes to, what will we do with not too many voices. So you often, like with League of Legends, you have one publisher, and this publisher can sit together, can sit inside its company and decide, what can we do, how can we do that, and everything is really set up to be resolved more quickly, and not those typical processes like you see that now with the sports leagues. Now the leagues want to continue, but the politicians are not sure if they should allow it, so they have to sit together, they have to talk, they have to decide what's best for the business, what's best for the league, what's best for that. So, and an esports publisher doesn't have that problem or all this structure, so they can just, okay, we know what to do, we know what we can do, let's sit together and talk about what will be the best for our sport, and how can we resolve everything. And I think that's a big advantage. And with this international aspect that John mentioned, I think that's one of the biggest advantages for living in these modern days, that you still have the opportunity to be in contact with everyone around the world, like we are right now. This is so usually when you have events where you meet once every month or every 2 months, you start to forget that everyone's from somewhere else, because you always meet the same people at different places. You go, yeah, you're from South Africa, all right, you're from Australia, but you don't think about that anymore too much. And it stays the same. It's still, you're talking to the same people, but now online and stuff, and you organize things, games from, I don't know, from when you let people play from India versus New Zealand. You don't think about anymore that there are thousands of miles in between them. And this is what's one of the best aspects of esports, that it connects the world without any problem. And also it's a very inclusive sport. So you can have a woman play against a man, and there's no physical difference between them. You can't play, or people with who are, I don't know, in a wheelchair or something. It's absolutely no problem. They play on the same level, and they can compete on the same level. And no one thinks about twice that, oh, who's the person behind the name? No, it's just one person against one other person in one game, and that brings everyone together.
So that actually, I had a question a little bit earlier that I was curious about when you mentioned that the traditional athletes were starting to play with the esports athletes. Can you tell us a little bit about who was better and how they were doing? And then actually, if you could tell us about how someone could get started in esports. So obviously these traditional athletes they have maybe an interesting segue into your industry, but how could someone like myself get involved?
Okay, I answered.
I know there's a lot of questions.
Yeah,
how did the athletes do? How did they do?
That's totally different from player to player. So you have players, often, especially in football clubs, they have their own little FIFA tournament that want to be the best and everything. So you have some professional football players who are really good. So if they wouldn't be professional football players, they would have a chance at being professional esports athletes. So they are the first ones who jump at this opportunity to, oh yeah, let's play together. And so they're very, yeah, and but you also have those players like, oh yeah, I just like to play that at home sometimes. So yeah, let's see how that works. But usually, or all the time, if it's a professional esports athlete, he will be better than the footballer. But with a lot of the training, I think you can still, if you are talented enough and you have the will to do that, yeah, you can still do very well even in esports if you're a professional football player.
And I think, William, as well, one thing to touch on with that crossover piece is we're actually seeing a lot of crossover in racing. So in motorsports in particular, there's a huge crossover right now for F1 and for NASCAR in particular. Some people that are watching this might have heard some of the more negative stories from NASCAR recently, where Chip Ganassi Racing actually fired one of their drivers because of the behavior that they exhibited in a virtual competition. On the F1 side, on the more positive side of things, F1 was already starting to run their, I think it was their eFormula One series, but you're starting to see this very interesting shift where some of the drivers that didn't perform as well in person in live races are actually performing really well online, even though the tools they're using are very similar to the simulators they use for practice during the off season. And it's something we see on the professional side as well, is you have some players that perform much better online but get a bit of stage fright and don't perform as well at tournaments. So it creates some very interesting storylines as well for marketing and for sponsorships. But yeah, I would say like FIFA, NHL, there hasn't been as much crossover, and NBA would be the other big one. The NBA, the Phoenix Suns, I believe in particular, were playing out their previously scheduled matches online. So they're trying to continue that crossover and still keep and maintain some of that experience that their fans were looking for, to reduce the shock as they made that adjustment.
Then
Bring up some.
Oh, sorry, but for Zach and Josue, first Zach, you talked about how a recreational league transitioned into esports. How could rec leagues around the country do the same thing that you've done? And then Josue, if you could talk a little bit about, if I'm someone who just wants to get into esports gaming, how do I do that?
So we partnered with a St. Louis-based company called Mission Control, and they pretty much designed the league formats and all of that kind of stuff. And then we kind of crossed over with our own way we run our adult rec leagues, to kind of formulate how we do things. And our whole thing is just getting the average Joe to be able to play online and compete against other people. There's obviously tons of professional esports players, but most of our people that are going to play, they like to play. They might be pretty good, but they just want to get a little more competition. So you're able to find a rec company like us and go on that, download this Mission Control app and join our league. And you can find all our different games and whatnot like that. But it's definitely like we're just trying to be accessible to the regular person as opposed to a professional.
Yeah, and in terms of really getting into esports, there's a growing number of sort of avenues that you can approach this from, and it really depends on kind of where you are from like a career age range perspective. Right now you're seeing leagues as early as high school and even middle school start to implement, you know, competitive circuits around gaming. Obviously our focus is, or my focus is collegiate. And so that's also a really, really quickly growing sort of aspect of esports that's really exciting. And then obviously you have professionals where the range of ages is really, really wide, as Dominque said. Like the professional players right now are 19 to 26 for her teams, but you're even seeing a lot of younger players that are getting picked up and drafted for amateur teams, getting them ready for that sort of more competitive level. I think it really starts with having a passion for either a game or a type of game. And it also depends on kind of what you want from it. I'm obviously more of like the support staff oriented. I'm notoriously bad at every game that I touch, but I really do care about the scene and the players. And that's kind of why I do what I do. And so yeah, it's about finding your passion within the esports scope, because there are a lot of things that you can do. But if you want to get competitive, it's not unlike traditional sports. It's about not just practicing, but practicing effectively, finding a group that you're going to grow with, and yeah, looking around, especially locally now, I think there's a lot of opportunities to really get into it. I know that at the very least for Denver, there's local esports arenas that are doing local tournaments all the time where you can just enter and see how you do. And so yeah, it's about really finding the passion within it and then putting in the hours. It is a lot of work. It's the commitment of a traditional sport, if not you know, more so, because you have to spend so much time not just online but with your team honing your craft. So yeah, it's about looking and finding your place within the scope.
So I do want to be cognizant of the amount of time that we have left. We have about 7 minutes left to this conversation. I do have some questions about like collegiate level recruiting and things like that and the Olympics, but I want to pivot very quickly before getting to that in terms of business. Dominque, you mentioned NASCAR and a bit of a snafu where people are learning to have to adapt to new technologies. Like now they are under much more of a microscope. They have a literal mic in front of them or attached to them. I'm wondering what other businesses, other industries can learn from esports, from things like that even. I mean, obviously we've transitioned into a very virtual world for the time being, and we need to be more cognizant of maybe how we look or how we're speaking, especially because it can be recorded. Are there other things that that you've experienced, maybe coming from another industry before getting into esports, that you think others could benefit from knowing?
I think something that Josue touched on is really important, that esports should be taken seriously as an industry and as a profession. You know, when I worked in recruiting before, I always used to give feedback to candidates when they would do video call interviews, that you know, that if you're doing an interview, you should still dress the way you would if you were going for an in-person interview. Just because the medium that you're using is a digital one versus in person doesn't mean that it devalues the experience at all. Rather, it means that there are more opportunities for you to put in that extra work. Esports, similarly, you know, just because we move to online doesn't mean that we should lower our standards in terms of the type of product that we're delivering or the level that we're performing at. Yes, there are factors that are often outside of our control that we have to work around. For example, internet connection, your power goes out, any number of things. But again, it's no different than if you were going to a live event. If I'm going to a live event, I have to worry about, okay, well, what if there's a fire in the building? What if there's a medical emergency? You know, what if the power goes out in that building? Like, there are still a lot of the same challenges, and it's really just about planning and being thoughtful about how you approach it. but still, at the end of the day, just take it seriously like anything else. Same thing for our panel today, right? We dress the way we would have for an actual panel, just because some of us might be working out of our bedroom or out of our living room doesn't mean that we should necessarily be slacking off, right? If I'm working in my pajamas all day, it's going to put me in a different mindset than if I'm actually dressed to attend an actual panel and conversation. And with online, you have the ability to reach so many more people and make a bigger impact. But like you said, then you also need to be thoughtful about who is listening, who could potentially be listening, when they could be listening. Once things are on the internet, they're there forever. And you only, in this case, you only have one chance to make that first impression. So it is important that you put your best foot forward. Yeah, I think there's good and bad, and it's just about how you approach it. I think overall, if folks want to learn from esports, it's really just build your network and lots of knowledge sharing. Equally for us on the esports side, there are a lot of things that we can learn from other industries, right? When I was working on the business side, I had to learn very quickly that not everyone who works at a game publisher comes from a games background. And there are small assumptions that we make there that can fundamentally shift how we approach the problem. Even more so in esports, where it's growing so quickly and everyone is coming from all over the world, that you shouldn't just take the business approach, but you shouldn't also just take the endemic one. So really find the balance between everything is probably the best advice I would give for anyone looking to come into the space, and find partners that you can have conversations with and build connections with that you can trust.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the other guys on the panel?
I think Dominque said everything you can say about that. But another important thing is what you also mentioned already, is that eSport can also learn from other directions. Like it often feels like eSport was in this own bubble where it's like, yeah, we do things different here, and this is how it's how we handled it forever, and this is why we will handle it like that forever. But they started to learn ever since it exploded so big and grew so much, that they are not this niche area anymore. They can't just try to, we will handle our things like we always have. They also have to learn how businesses work, how the whole business areas, and or when you deal with other companies or countries and everywhere, that it's not eSport is not, it's an exciting new opportunity, but it's not an exception where everything works differently than anywhere else. You have to learn from both sides. Esports has to learn from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world can learn from esports, but it's not just one side. And yeah, so I think that was very important, Dominque.
One thing that was mentioned earlier was Twitch, and I know that Twitch was originally created as sort of social media with live video game streaming, but it is really fascinating to see how other industries are adapting to it. All sorts of performers, especially, and using it as a sort of fundraising tool. I'm sort of curious what tools came out of esports that are going to now be sort of distributed across other industries, or more accessed more widely. We are coming up at the top of the hour. I do want to ask one more sort of bonus question, but I do want to thank everyone who's joined for today, the panelists especially, and all of the attendees who are asking questions. When I was doing research into esports, I was coming across high schools, as Josue was mentioning, and they are definitely getting more and more involved, but they're currently labeling them, at least in the ones in Colorado that I've seen, as competitive activities instead of sports. So I'm sort of wondering where you guys think esports is going. Do you think it will get into something like the Olympics? Based on the trajectory of the past few years, how quickly is it growing, and where is it going?
Okay, I can answer that in the German perspective, because we have a very big discussion over here if esports should be considered officially a sport or not, and everyone's discussing about that. And you see the German dual way there, that how we handle sports as well. We have in schools and for the bigger mass of people, but you also have a small part of professionals. And this is what we see a lot in Germany and in Europe, that schools have, they have sports clubs in schools, not professional clubs, but where the people can meet and do their sport. There are a lot more of eSport department in schools as well. So they have most of the schools have PCs now or consoles, so they have the hardware. So, and also teachers who are maybe in their mid-30s who were interested in games when they were young. So they want to be a teacher in such social activity. So I think especially in Germany and Europe, it will become a sport that's professional and for everyone in school. So yeah, I think that will happen here. I don't know how it will turn out in the US.
Canadian esports is pretty underdeveloped. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sweet. Mine is just like a really quick thing, and I guess this is more of like maybe my personal perspective on it, like very personal perspective, as opposed to maybe like the industry. But I think that when this first started getting big and started getting really competitive, I think people really wanted to fight for that label of sport, and that was always kind of the comparison. I think that it is important to see it for what it is and not for comparing it to something like a sport, like fighting over that title. I think that it is really important to see it as, you know, the competitive gaming sphere. It really is its own thing. And while, you know, a school might be like, no, it isn't a real sport, I think the conversation should be shifted more to what the priorities of the activity are. Yes, it is a competitive activity. You know, I think it's the focus should definitely be on the various facets that make it how competitive it actually is. You know, the competition, the team, the energy that you get from playing on a team, the fact that it's generally managed, you know, very much like a traditional sport, but it has its, you know, unique points to it. So I'm curious to see what especially the international community will start doing with it, because at least from our end, on the collegiate side, we really just want to make it known as something serious, something that people are taking seriously, and something that people are really investing a lot of time into because they care about it and because they're passionate about being successful in it. Yeah, those are my 2 cents on that.
Games are a weird spot because they were created as a business product, right? Video games weren't started like basketball, for example, as necessarily a pastime just by people. They were created with the idea of sales and revenue and you know, driving business growth. And they became a pastime out of it. And games are actually now as popular of an entertainment form as you would see with music, movies, TV shows. Like, people are spending more time watching Twitch now than they are watching cable network TV or even things like Netflix or Hulu. So you run in, like, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is how do you take this pastime and still drive value back to the publisher, to the league operators, to the teams. But then at the same time, there's also this idea of how do you balance the fact that it's deregulated compared to other sports, right? Marc touched on this, where in Germany you're having those conversations with government around should it be considered an actual sport. Like Josue said, we want it to be taken seriously, but at the same time, maybe we don't want it to be taken too seriously, where now we have and this turns into more of a political debate that we definitely don't want to get into, but it does turn into that conversation around the balance between government and third-party body involvement with businesses and athletes and operators. There's no easy answer, because the other challenge is there are so many different games, and each game's ecosystem is at such a different stage of its life cycle that I think it's really on a per game basis. I think we will see the more developed titles eventually move into the Olympics, perhaps more in that exhibition style still. But I think just a continued crossover, and like I touched on earlier, the fact that our world has fundamentally shifted in the last 3 months, I think almost anything is fair game once this is all said and done.
Absolutely. I mean, I have so many questions for you guys, and I could talk to you all day. But I do want to thank you, Marc, Dominque, Zach, Josue, for spending your morning or afternoon or evening with us, and teaching our members quite a bit about your industry and what they can do with it in their own. So thank you so much on behalf of GACC. And John, did you want to say a few words about WorldDenver?
No, I just also wanted to say thank you. And, you know, we do this kind of international exchange. That's our work. And similar to the way in which live sports moves to esports, our live exchanges are moving to virtual exchanges. And so it's really great to see folks from the same industry and see all this commonality, shared vision, and to watch your industry grow. And I hope, Marc and Dominque, you get to come at some point to the US and meet with folks here and continue to grow this industry. And I'll also put the plug in for both William and I that we are membership organizations and we exist because of our membership. So thank you to all our members. And if you're not one yet, hopefully take a look at our website and join us.
And that's worlddenver.org and GACC-CO.org. So thank you so much. Thank you again, and have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks.